Our very special VIP guest this afternoon is Gino Ferrare, and as many of you may know by the name, yes, he is related to Christina. This is Christina's younger brother and uncle to Zachary DeLorean. So without further ado, we're gonna get started, and go ahead, take it away, Gino.
Well, first of all, thank you, everybody. I appreciate you guys taking the time to invite me here. I am Christina's little brother, and I say that because she is my esteemed older sister, if you will. And growing up in the time that I did, I was actually a lot younger, and so my exposure was one of awe and coming from a very young age. So I share that with you. My life with John was one that I have some extremely fond memories of with regard to his involvement with the family. I first had the pleasure of meeting John in 1972 when it was shortly after that Christina came home and she showed the family a picture of this gentleman on a yellow Corvette, and it was a article on John, and she said, this is the gentleman that I'm going to be meeting, and he is certainly somebody that I have an interest in exploring, a further relationship with. And the story at the time was I was 13 years old, Christina was 23, John was 46, I believe at the time, perhaps maybe 47. And she was introduced to John by a close friend, both of theirs, which was an entertainment attorney by the name of Ed Hoogstraat. And Ed was married to Pat Crowley, who was the lady who was famous for being Don't Eat the Daisies. Many of you may remember that television show from way back when. The relationship blossomed pretty quickly. Christina was available at the moment. She had come out of a relationship, a marriage, I should say, that didn't work out. And so she was 23 years old, on top of her game as one of the top paid models of the time, glamour models. And John was on top of his game as the vice president and general manager of General Motors at the time. And so the first time I actually met him, being a young 13-year-old, I was protective of my sister. I really didn't know too much about this guy, other than the fact that he was some bigwig in Detroit. And I was going to give him the once-over. And wanted to make sure that he was for real and that he was going to treat my sister right. And if you can imagine this young, 13-year-old with an attitude like that, I mean, that's basically, who I am. I'm very protective of my family. And so I met John, and we were in the living room of my parents' house at the time, and this was in West Hollywood. And John came in, and he was this just a looming individual in terms of the fact that his presence in the room just kind of sucked up the energy. 6'4", lean, mean, in the sense that at that particular time he was working out like crazy, so he was very buff, dark hair, and had this wonderful smile on his face, and was just extremely warm and inviting. And it was such a great opportunity to sit and meet with this gentleman, and I started talking with him, and one of the first things he said to me was, John had a way of disarming you. And he said to me, he goes, do you like motorcycles? And of course, they were a big interest to me at the time. And I said, yeah, of course. He goes, well, I've got 5 of them down by this ranch that I own down in Palma Valley. Would you like to ride one time? And I looked at him and I said, this is going to be the start of a wonderful relationship. And that moment gave me an opportunity to really kind of get to know him a little bit better. And as you know, the story went on that they fell in love with each other. And not too long after that, I was introduced to John's adopted son at the time, Zachary, who was just a wonderful tot of about 2 years old, probably the cutest little kid you'd have ever seen in your life. And I became very close to Zachary at that point. There was just this bond between the two of us that really grew very closely throughout the years in his younger years. And I started to see, the possibility of this family coming into ours. And from my perspective, it was going to be a wonderful experience. And it was, from that particular point on forward. We had the opportunity to get to know each other a little bit better, John and Christina, shortly thereafter in a whirlwind relationship. I think it was probably about a year after they decided that they were going to get married. Christina co-adopted Zachary, and their life began. People often ask me what type of gentleman John was. And, I have my own perspective. And you have to understand that being a young, impressionable individual, and my parents being very hardworking, middle-class people, I was introduced to a world that was quite alluring in the sense that this is, meeting John and understanding who he was showed me what possibilities were and what I could do with my life. And he became a role model for me in that particular sense. So you would have to understand that this is somebody that I looked up to greatly, and still do as I look at his legacy today and what he's built. But my sister was in the entertainment industry, and I had the opportunity to meet some very interesting people because of that. But I didn't aspire to be an entertainment person either. As an entertainer or as an executive in that world. What I wanted to be was somebody like John. And because his business acumen was something that really interested me as a young man. As far as who he was on a personal level, because that's what I could really speak to here. I was not old enough to be involved in the DeLorean experience, if you will, from the company standpoint. But I have to kind of go back to the movie that was done recently that was called Framing John DeLorean. And it was, John was portrayed by Alec Baldwin. And I just want to kind of give a comment on that portrayal. One was that they did an amazing job of taking Alec Baldwin and making him look like John. But he didn't really capture the personality of the man. Many of you may not know this, but John was actually, there was a side of him that was extremely lighthearted. He loved humor, and he was able to disarm any type of situation and any type of negotiation that he was in with the humor that he used. So, and the other thing is that he was a guy that used to laugh at his own jokes. So I'm not really quite sure if anybody here is aware of that. But, Alec's portrayal of him, while, I'm not being critical of him as an actor, I'm not sure he really knew the full story of John. Well, he portrayed him a bit more serious, if you will, and a bit more wooden. That wasn't John. Like I said before, he was incredibly witty. And this is an important aspect to be able to have if you're going to do the things that John aspired to do. We've had a lot of conversations in the past because I was interested about his background, how he grew up in the automotive industry. And John had shared with me, he opened up. We actually had a close relationship, and I think it was because, being as young as I was, that he felt as though that I was somebody that was, I'm not going to use the word a threat, but obviously somebody that was really interested in him as a human being, not necessarily as to what he had achieved. So he kind of took to me and would spend time with me and tell me about his time as a young engineer and the things that he had done. And I started to realize that I was speaking to an individual that was incredibly creative. We all know that by the history, but I was fascinated by the many things that he invented. There were a lot of patents to his name. I started to understand that he was very instrumental in the development of the Corvette, which was obviously something that I was familiar with as a young man. And then I didn't realize the depth of everything else that he was involved in terms of his innovation. And as I got to know him a little bit better, and he would tell me that he was never really comfortable in the corporate arena that he was involved in because of the politics and the difficulty with some of the older attitudes. One of the things that he had said to me was that if you want to be successful, you have to think out of the box. And I'll never forget that, because that's something that has really kind of stuck with me in my business world as I live today. And that is that problem solvers don't go to the book to find the solution. Problem solvers think out of the box to be able to make things happen. And that's exactly what John did. He was telling me stories about the people in General Motors that were above him that were absolutely happy with the fact that he had taken Pontiac and had put it back on its feet, if you will. They would criticize him in one sense because he was a Maverick and wouldn't conform to the corporate structure, but at the same time, they were extremely happy that he was selling more cars in the Pontiac division than Ford did as an entirety at that particular time in space. From there, they put him in charge of Chevy, but John realized that if he was ever going to completely realize his dream of actually becoming a automaker that was going to produce something that was meaningful for auto buyers, that he had to do it on his own. The other thing that he impressed upon me was that he was a master at public relations. And obviously he had a master's degree in business administration. He had a master's degree in engineering. But one of the things that I observed as a young man was that he was good at being able to adapt himself to whatever environment that he saw was necessary in order to achieve what he was trying to achieve. So what does that mean? Well, you look at the fact that he was criticized for being flamboyant, for being around the Hollywood scene, if you will. And John pretty much learned early on that if you're going to promote something, you need to be the promoter of that yourself. And by having these contacts in the Hollywood world, which he happened to like, and they liked him as well, he was able to do some incredible things. I mean, when you go back to the marketing that was done with the GTO at the time, he had taken some of the Hollywood notables, even the sports figures, one in particular being O.J. Simpson at the time, who was a very popular person at that moment. And, understanding that, there's a brand new, a demographic of people that wanted to buy cars, and it wasn't your dad or your grandfather. It was young people that now had money. These were the baby boomers. I think Lee Iacocca was also another one who actually recognized that with the advent of the Mustang. And these were the Mavericks of the industry, and John was certainly one of them. Some of the more kind of lighthearted benefits of being Christina Ferrare's younger brother was that I always had a car. And it was kind of cool because one of the things that John had done for me was that as I was growing up, they were doing a lot of research in order to get the DMC-12 off of the drawing board and into production. So one of the things the company did was that they would lease cars from different companies, and they would basically take them apart and analyze them. And they had these leases for 6 months or a year or whatever it was. And when they were done with them, John would send the cars my way, and I had a car all the way through high school, all the way to the end of college. Some of the more notable cars, I mean, he started off with a Renault, which was kind of cool, having this French car, and nobody else had one. And he said, here, you can drive it. And he said, just don't crash it. And I didn't, thank God. From there, it went to a Mazda RX-7, and that was the really cool, sleek, silver one that came out. That was mine for a period of time. And I'll never forget driving down the freeway one time while I had this car. And it had a sunroof on it, and it was a manual sunroof. And I'm 18 at the time. And I said, oh, what happens if I flip this switch over here? And I'm going 65, 70 miles down the freeway, and all of a sudden, the sunroof goes flying off, and I look behind, and all of a sudden the next car behind me is running over, and I'm going, oh, man. So I had to figure out, okay, I got to call John, I got to tell him. So I call him up, and I said, John, I ruined your sunroof. And he goes, hey, no problem, just go down and order the part and pay for it. So I figured, okay, well, that's the cheap price to pay for a car that I'm getting for free. So I did that, but he was never really upset with things like that. From that, it went to a Lancia Spider, which was an amazing car. And not as amazing as what the DeLorean eventually became to be, but these were things that they were looking at. Had the benefit of having this wonderful car in college, and everybody thought I was rich, which I wasn't. But it helped with the ladies, I can tell you that. And we just had a wonderful time of just a wonderful relationship with John. He was great to my mom and my dad, extremely generous, and just somebody that, if you had at a barbecue and you were having a beer with him, you would feel very, very comfortable with him. Aside from that, there are many stories that speak about his leadership style. Many people have come out and said that their experiences were wonderful, and they look back on them fondly. There were some people that came back and they had some negative things to say. But you know what they say, that he who wins the war can write the history. It would have been a different situation if John's company was not straddled with the difficulties that came through. I will let you in on a little bit of things that he had shared with me. You may have heard about this, maybe not, but I will tell you one particular story, which is kind of interesting as it leads up to this next thing. And that is the moment that he was arrested. And I go back a few months prior to that, actually a couple of years. And it's kind of an interesting story. It's actually tragic, but it's also funny in one particular sense. A couple of years before the DeLorean was developed, John had purchased for my sister Christina, they were married at the time, of course, a brand new Mercedes 450 SEL. And this was a gorgeous car. And it was a gift on her birthday. And they left it at my mom and dad's house, primarily because when they came into town, they wanted to make sure that there was a vehicle for them. And we also had a room set aside for them at the house so that we could spend time there. And primarily, John was concerned about Zachary at the time. If they were traveling and they had Zachary, they wanted to make sure that he was in a safe place, a loving place. So my mom and dad and our place was actually the natural place for that. So here's his car, there for many years. And I was told never to touch it. And I will tell you one time I did, but the reality is that for the most part, I honored that. But the night before John was arrested, and you have to understand that nobody in the family, and I'm not sure that Christina understood as much as well, but nobody knew what the difficulty was that he was going through with regards to the company and the impending problems that were happening. We thought everything was great, everything was moving forward. Calls me the night before and he says, hey, Gino, I'm going to be in LA tomorrow. And I have a meeting at the Sheraton Hotel down by the airport. And I need you to drop off my car at the airport at the, I think it was the 94th Street or the 96th Street parking lot at the time. And I want you to put the keys underneath the seat. So when I'm done with my meeting, I could jump in the car and take off and, meet you guys back at the house. I said, sure. So jump in the car, and off I go. My dad's following me, and I decided to take the top off because it was a semi-convertible, if you will. It had a hard top that you could take off, and then they had the convertible. And driving down, feeling pretty good about it, and just, this car is just amazing. And I park it, my dad and I get in the car, we go home. Well, next day, I'm a young man, and I'm in the manufacturing sector. I was about 22 years old at the time, 23. And working for another company because I asked John for a job and he gave me the best advice I ever had in my life. And that was, okay, I'll hire you, but I want you to get 10 years of experience with somebody else before you come work for DeLorean. And I said, Okay, so I went out and did that. So I'm in the office, and I get this call from my mom, and she's all frantic. She's going, "Oh my God, John got arrested." I go, "What are you talking about?" She goes, "Turn on the news, turn on the news." So at that time, we didn't have TVs in the office, and all I had was an AM FM radio. I turned around to KNX Radio LA, and it's all over the news. And the guy was talking about the fact that John DeLorean, now catch this, was arrested at the LA airport with a suitcase full of cocaine found in his car. And of course, I'm freaking out and I'm going, "Holy crap, what are you talking about? I drove that car. Oh my God, what's going on?" And I had no idea what was happening. And so for a period of about 6 hours, we were all sitting there by the phone trying to figure out what was going on. And I was absolutely dumbfounded that something like this had happened, and I was the last person to drive that car. Thank God. What the reality of that situation was is that the cocaine that was actually planted by our friends in the FBI was actually brought into the hotel room and never had anything to do with the car. And that came out pretty quickly. So I was semi-relieved from that. But then, of course, it was a 2-year endeavor of court cases and difficulty that happened with that entire scenario. I will tell you that John maintained to me and to many people that he was set up, and we believe that was true. He was set up by the FBI, which was called entrapment, and many of you know that he was acquitted from that. But I would ask him, I said, why did this happen? And he told me very clearly. He said, "Now, look, what I'm going to tell you is his perspective of what he told me, okay? That's all I can do. All I can speak of is what I heard from the man's mouth, okay? And what he told me is that the economy hit the skids. He had a bunch of cars that were ready to roll out, and they were having an enormous time trying to get them sold. And as a result, his company needed more money. He went back to the British government, who had funded the factory in Belfast for about 120 million pounds, which was, I think, about 175 million in our terms, in our dollars. And they had decided that they weren't going to fund it any further. And John had a lot more on the table with regard to his dream. There were 2,000 workers in Belfast that he knew that he had to negotiate for. He had no intention of moving that factory, but he used it as a bargaining point to talk to. He told me this. He goes, I wanted to save the factory for the people that work there, and what I did was I went to the government and I told them, "Look, I'm in negotiations with Puerto Rico, and if you guys don't give me the money, I'm going to have to move down there." That was a negotiation point, trying to get things to keep things in Belfast. And the answer was no. And he pissed off some people in the British government royally, who were very, very tight to the American, the United States government. And his assertion was that he was set up as a result of that endeavor. There are people that have different views of that, and will give you different reports. But again, I'm just giving you the perspective of what John told me as a young man. And that proceeded to create a very tumultuous time for John. Many of you may not know this, but John was very close to getting a degree in law when he was doing his studies. Obviously a brilliant guy. We went through a process. When I say we, I mean, I was there. I was an observer. But he went through a process where he was interviewing some of the best defense lawyers in the country at the time in order to take on this 800-pound gorilla known as the federal government. And he was constrained to California because part of the situation that called for his bail was that he couldn't leave California. So he was literally laid up for 2 years at my parents' house because he couldn't leave. And so, he had his own bedroom, and he would coordinate his own defense at that particular point. So then came the the opportunity for John to interview some attorneys that he felt could represent him properly. And they would invite him over to the house. And of course, my mom, being an Italian mom who could cook like nobody else, would always have these huge dinners. And I remember sitting there, across the table from Vincent Bugliosi, who at that point had converted from a prosecutor to a defense attorney. Brilliant man, wonderful man. Loved my mom's cooking, by the way, because he understood it. Stories like that. F. Lee Bailey was the next gentleman who came by, having dinner with us and talking to John about these things. But of course, they would always talk in private. And finally, John heard of a young lawyer that had a reputation for really understanding federal law. And it was a young lawyer by the name of Howard Weitzman. And absolutely brilliant law mind. And not only that, he was a wonderful human being. They actually became friends. And Howard went on to be very, very close friends to our family many, many years later, up until his death recently, about a year ago. And John chose this one particular lawyer that didn't have the notoriety that these other lawyers had, but he was a street fighter and he understood federal law. And between the two of them, a lot of people think that, the defense was really, John hired a bunch of lawyers, but really between the two of them, they were able to fashion a defense that actually held up. And John was acquitted of the charges that he was accused of because they were able to prove entrapment. I was there. I saw the trials. I was in there when they were interviewing, cross-examining the FBI agents. I saw what went on. It was pretty harrowing, but they got through it. The saddest part about it all was that it was difficult for John to kind of regain his footing. I look at some of the concepts that are out there, that what the future of the DeLorean car could have been. John used to tell me, he goes, I want to build a car that would last forever, so that when somebody puts their hard-earned money in it, they don't have to worry about it breaking down in 2 years and having to buy a new one, which was really the precedent of what the big automakers would do. And that's why he chose stainless steel body, for example. Being a gentleman that grew up in the East Coast, he knew the ravages of salt on the road and body decay. And I mean, there were many things that the car did right. There were things that they criticized it for, being underpowered. But the concept was, I want something that is going to be beautiful, going to be slick, going to be sexy, that when somebody invests in it, they're going to get their money's worth out of it. John was always thinking about the average guy, because even though he had driven himself to levels that were far above what most of us would achieve in our lives, at the heart, he was always a Midwestern boy, and he knew what it was like to grow up in a working family. And that was the man. And that's the man that I remember. I wish he was here today to be able to talk to him. But I do know that he had a strong faith, and that faith was in Jesus Christ. John became a born-again believer during his incarceration, that short period of time. And he turned to God for truth and for strength, and that got him through it. And he may not be here today, but because of his faith in Jesus Christ, he stands before the Lord as somebody who's been made righteous by the blood of Christ. And so I feel confident that at some point in the future, I know I'm going to see him again. And we miss him. So that's my experience with John. I've got, obviously other things that I could share with you, but I certainly want to open it up to any questions that anybody has at this particular point.
Thanks, Gino. Thanks, Gino. Thanks, Gino. We are going to open it up to questions. Yes, I was just going to recommend getting a little drink there. Wet your whistle, and we're going to try a few questions. Yeah, anybody have a question for Gino?
Is there a camera on our side? Is there a camera on our side?
It's right here. Yeah. So you can come out to the middle if you want.
Excuse me. Hey, Gino. It's Matt Summer. Just wanted to say hi and thank you for coming virtually. Nice to sort of meet you. I'm sorry I didn't have
Pleasure.
the thing close enough. I'm Matt Summer.
Oh, Matt.
Yeah. Just wanted to say hi, no question. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that.
Go ahead, Ed. Go ahead. Hello. Go ahead, Ed. Oh, sorry.
Hi, Gino. John from Wisconsin. First thing,
Hi, John.
I'm a big Star Trek fan. You look a little bit like Jonathan Frakes, Commander Riker. So when you first popped on the screen, I went, oh, does he own a DeLorean? So, but I want to thank you, and your perspective is very, very unique, considering your relationship to him. One of my other heroes is Johnny Carson. So every time I run into people, I'm kind of curious about that relationship. I know that the two Johns and their wives would hang out and go out to dinner and such. But do you have any insight as to how that relationship unfolded during the trial and after the trial, and if that relationship stayed connected or if they disintegrated?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me kind of answer that question first by kind of taking a step back. Johnny Carson was obviously somebody that John knew as he was developing the company. He was surrounded by several, people in the industry, Sammy Davis Jr. being one of them. I mean, it goes on and on and on. But Johnny Carson invested, I believe, about $250,000 in the DeLorean project. I had the chance to meet him a couple of times. I've had dinner over at his wife's house several times. He was a very nice man, very reserved. I mean, the question that everybody would always ask is, what's he really like? I don't think anybody really knew, because he was always a very guarded individual. But he was, as a young person, being able to meet somebody like Johnny Carson was something very special. I will say that when the trial hit, John was friends with a lot of people. And I'm not saying this from a critical sense, so please don't take this the wrong way. But most of the people in corporate America that he was very, very close to, including his investors, separated themselves from John when the trial hit, and Johnny Carson being one of them. I'm not casting a judgment as to what the reasons for doing that, but obviously when somebody is accused of being what John was accused from, you want to make sure that you're not thrown into the same boat, if you will. I don't know of any conversations that ensued between John and Johnny Carson after. All I can tell you is that I do know for a fact that 95% of the people that called him a friend distanced themselves from him, which I know was very difficult for him at the time.
Any other questions? Any other questions?
Hello, Gino. It's nice to see you. I'm just wondering about Christina and what is she doing now? I knew him back in the day when I worked for Mr. DeLorean, and I'm just wondering how she is and how her children and what's going on with her.
Well, thank you for asking. Christina and I are quite close. So is my sister Diana. The three of us remain very close, as I had mentioned. Christina's doing good. She was obviously successful as a talk show host for many years, from 1985 up until about 2015. She's also been very active with writing books. She's been very successful writing books with regard to cooking and entertaining. She's been married to her current husband, Tony, for about, for 37, 38 years now. They are happy. Christina has 2 children with John, Zachary and Catherine. When she married Tony, she became stepmom to his 3 children, Dennis and Mark and Annie. And then they had 2 girls of their own, Ariana, Thermopoulos and Alex Thermopoulos, who are social media icons, if you will, today, those two young ladies. And she is extremely happy. She recently, I would say recently, about 7 years ago, she came down with multiple myeloma, which is blood cancer. And a few years prior to that, had you been diagnosed with it, there would have been no cure. But modern science modern medicine has advanced to the point to where they're able to treat it, and it comes back every 5 years, and they have to continue it. The hope is that an individual dealing with it will be able to outlive the disease, even though it's a very arduous disease to go through. Christina, through the process of prayer and through taking mushroom products that are immune boosting products, if you will, has been in remission, which is very unusual, for 7 years now, maybe 8, going on 8. The doctors don't really understand why she didn't go back to the cancer, which is what the natural course of this disease is. And Christine gives the glory to God for that healing, and she also stands by the mushrooms that she's taking as well. She is taking life very easily. She doesn't take it too seriously right now, and she works very hard at not letting things get in the way of that happiness. And to answer your question, she's doing well. So thank you for asking.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Gino? Unbelievable, Gino, you've silenced the crowd. I think you've given us a great background on your relationship with John, but also there's quite a few people, especially with Colleen here, who wanted to know exactly how Christina was doing. So we thank you for both of those things, sharing your memories of John and your relationship, and giving us an update on Christina. A nice round of applause there for Gino. We thank you very much for participating today.
There's one last thing I do want to add to it, if I can. I'll just be really short.
No, go right ahead.
But that is, when you consider the dichotomy of being a leader in industry and being a human being, John embodied both of those, okay? You can't be a leader, particularly of a project or a company that's going to be difficult to get off the ground, and be a passive individual. You have to be an individual that has got passion, that has got vision, and willing to make those hard choices. John was that. There was a lot of criticism given to him based on the fact that some of the things that some people interpreted as being cutthroat. I'm not so sure that I would use the same words, but if you look at any one of the industry leaders that have shaped this nation, they all had an element of, leader, get out of the way. And that was John. But at the same time, devoted family man, loved his family, loved Christina, loved his children, liked to help people. And interesting to have that mix that seemed to not be congruent with each other, but that was John, the complicated person of John DeLorean. I'm very happy to be called his brother-in-law, and like I said, I'd be happy to stand up for his legacy anytime. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thanks again, Gino.
Thank you, everyone. God bless.
Have a great afternoon.